I was just a kid when my parents' divorce made me their pawn years later. Their lies, smear campaigns, and desperation finally made me cut them off forever. I'm Noah, 29M, the kid of a divorce that never ended. Not legally, the papers were signed when I was 15, but emotionally, the trial kept going for a decade and I was the only witness anyone cared about. If you'd asked our neighbors back then, they would have called us a strong family. We were the holiday card kind. Matching sweaters, polite smiles, a golden retriever named Scout. Inside, though, Tuesday nights smelled like burned dinner and Cold War. Doors closed a little too hard. Laughter arrived on cue when company came over, then disappeared like steam. The bomb dropped on a wet March afternoon. I came home to 2 stacks on the kitchen table. One of legal envelopes, one of printed photos. Mom and Dad weren't looking at each other. They were looking at me. That was my first lesson in the kind of divorce we were going to have. Not the kind where adults protect a kid, but the kind where a kid is recruited. You deserve the truth, each of them said, separately, but with the same solemn tone that always means you're about to be handed a weapon. From that day on, my phone was a pipeline. Screenshots, just so you know. Long essays disguised as texts. Lists of grievances that read like closing arguments. My weekends turned into depositions. Sit with Dad at a diner while he dissected Mom's spending. Sit with Mom in the car outside my school while she explained patterns of control. I learned phrases like gaslighting and parental alienation before I learned how to change a tire. The custody schedule called for equal time, but there's no equal time when every hour is scored for points. It wasn't just words. It was props. Receipts slid across tables. Bank statements folded into my hoodie pocket. Photos I never asked to see. Proof of nothing, proof of everything. Proof that 2 people can love you and still use you as a lever. I'm not asking you to take sides, they'd say. Right before asking me to take a side, I kept a cheap spiral notebook in my backpack and wrote down times and dates because it felt safer if the facts lived somewhere outside my head. I tried neutrality and called it maturity. I told myself I was handling it. I got good at nodding, at telling each of them a version of what they wanted to hear without betraying the other. Adults praised me for being so composed. The way people compliment a statue. My grades didn't slip. I slept technically. I ate technically. I even made varsity track. As if running fast enough could beat the magnet in my pocket vibrating with fresh subpoenas dressed as texts. The night it tipped, there wasn't a fight. There was a silence so dense it rang. Dad had left a folder on my bed labeled, "For your records." Mom had put a manila envelope in my backpack with my name in careful cursive. I sat at my desk and opened both at once, pages fanning like wings. It was the same story told in 2 fonts and 3 colors of highlighter. Somewhere between the spreadsheets and the timelines, I realized I'd been taught to measure love by exhibits. The idea slid in quiet as snowfall. If you make me choose between you, I'm not choosing either. That thought scared me. Then it steadied me. I folded everything back. I put both stacks under my bed, neutral ground, and lay there in the dim light listening to Scout's nails click the hallway. In the morning, I would run 5 miles and go to school and pretend to be fine. But something irreversible had happened on that carpet with my knees knocked together and the dust drifting under my lamp. I wasn't just their son anymore. I was their strategy. And strategies don't get tucked in at night. That was the beginning. Not of their divorce, that was already printed and notarized, but of mine. The quiet separation between me and the version of family I'd been sold. I couldn't name it then, but I can now. The day I started saving my love for people who didn't make me prove I deserved it. Next came the custody calendar that looked like a checkerboard and a holiday that detonated itself. Next came the golden child myth, the fake diagnosis, and a will that felt like a grenade with my name on the pin. But before any of that, there was this. A teenager at a desk choosing for the first time not to choose. The lawyers called it a parenting plan. I called it a chessboard. Mondays and Tuesdays at Mom's, Wednesdays and Thursdays at Dad's. Alternating weekends like a metronome set to civil. The calendar lived on our refrigerator in dry erase ink, and every square felt like a courtroom date with different lighting. Friends asked which house felt more like home. I learned to say, both. The way you answer a multiple choice question when none of the options fit. What I remember most is the quiet coordination of sabotage. Mom's house smelled like eucalyptus and court filings. Dad's house smelled like cologne samples and reheated takeout. Each place had a rhythm that pretended not to comment on the other. Mom's mornings began with green smoothies and articles about covert narcissists. left open on the kitchen tablet. Dad's evenings ended with sports on mute and a book about emotional vampires face down on the coffee table. They didn't accuse each other outright. They curated. They left breadcrumbs and called them facts. Holidays were minds hidden under tinsel. Thanksgiving split cleanly on paper. Lunch at one house, dessert at the other. In practice, each household ran late in a way that translated to hostage-taking. I ate 2 versions of the same meal and tasted none of it. Christmas mutated into an auction. Gifts arrived with backstories longer than warranties. Your mother doesn't believe in quality sat inside a pair of expensive headphones. Your father thinks experience matters more than objects was wrapped in plane tickets for a weekend that just happened to overlap with Dad's custodial time. Every ribbon came tied to an argument I didn't want. The adults spoke in italics. I'm only telling you this so you know the truth. I would never put you in the middle. You deserve to hear my side. I became a courier who wasn't allowed to admit he was delivering messages. Tell your father the recital starts at 6, would arrive in a text to me instead of a call to him. Let your mother know the check cleared, would ping my phone during algebra. If I forgot, if I dared to live like a kid. Each parent looked at me with wounded eyes as if I'd chosen the enemy. I practiced neutrality like a sport. I learned how to nod without agreeing, how to thank someone without endorsing the speech attached to the gift, how to be present without being recruitable. Guidance counselors called me resilient. My track coach said I had mental toughness. The truth was less cinematic. I had a running list in my head of things I couldn't say at one house because they were triggering at the other. Music I kept on headphones. Opinions I left in the locker room. I learned to carry my life like a glass of water filled to the brim. Arms straight, steps careful, eyes forward. The internet turned their private war public. Mom discovered support groups with screenshots. Dad found podcasts with vocabulary that made his side sound scientific. They didn't just feel wronged. They were part of movements. I saw pieces of our life, cropped, filtered, anonymized, used as examples by strangers whose bios featured scales of justice or prayer hands. It was bizarre to watch my family turned into content I didn't subscribe to. The first big twist arrived in spring, dressed as concern. Mom texted that she'd had a health scare and needed me more. She used words vague enough to imply catastrophe without offering diagnosis. Dad countered with printed lab results he said he'd helped interpret, a phrase that felt like a cough in a quiet theater. For 2 weeks, I lived like a pager waiting to go off. Every gym period I checked my phone. Every night I measured my sleep by how many times I jolted awake. When the scare fizzled into a follow-up appointment with nothing conclusive, nobody apologized for the siren they'd pulled. The subtext remained. See who shows up for you. See who fails you. I did show up, and I failed, both of them, by refusing to assign halos and horns the way they wanted. That's when Dad upgraded from podcasts to performance. He started calling me the man of the house and handing me envelopes with financial realities, as if a spreadsheet could deputize me. Mom retaliated with inspiration quotes on the fridge about chosen family, the kind you post when you've decided blood isn't cooperating. Each gesture came wrapped in love and stamped with strategy. Some nights I rehearsed sentences that might have saved us. I love you, but I won't be evidence. I never said them. You can't give a speech to a storm and expect the wind to take notes. Instead, I built small shelters. I ran longer. I added 15 minutes to my shower because hot water was the only place my phone couldn't follow me. I kept Scout's old tag on my keychain after he died. A reminder that something once loved me without keeping score. The day the checkerboard cracked was a birthday that belonged to no one and everyone. I had plans with friends I'd cleared with both calendars weeks in advance. That afternoon, Mom sent a text. She'd made a surprise dinner for just us. 30 minutes later, Dad emailed tickets to a game he'd pulled strings to get. Both messages arrived like emergencies of joy. I stared at my phone and felt the room tilt. Whatever I chose would be framed as betrayal. So I chose neither. I went with my friends and turned my phone off. When I turned it back on at midnight, there were 48 messages and a voicemail that started with a sigh and ended with silence. That was the moment I realized something essential. In our family, love meant responsiveness to summons. My refusal to answer wasn't teenage rebellion. It was survival. The next morning, a new kind of message arrived. Certified, stamped, requiring signature. A will update, Dad said. Routine. Mom texted a screenshot of her own paperwork with a caption about protecting what's right. The golden child in a divorce with one kid is the parent currently holding the pen. I didn't know it yet, But those envelopes were grenades with delayed fuses, labeled with my name. When parents divorce with only one kid, the fight isn't over custody. It's over custody of your loyalty. By 17, I understood this well enough to translate every sentence they said into what it really meant. Your mother doesn't respect boundaries, meant back me up in court next time. Your father doesn't take care of himself, meant remind him he'll die alone if he doesn't change. But the wills, that was new territory. Both sides suddenly wanted me enshrined in ink. Dad's paperwork came first. He made a show of sitting me down at the dining table, spreading out pages as if we were business partners. "This is for your security," he said, sliding me highlighted lines where my name appeared, everything framed as my inheritance. He grinned like he'd given me a gift, not a burden. Mom followed with her own reveal a week later, waiting until I was trapped in the passenger seat during a grocery run. She pulled an envelope from her purse, waved it like a winning lottery ticket. "I've made sure you're protected," she whispered, eyes darting like we were fugitives. Her voice was sugary, but the subtext burned. "See, I love you more. I value you more. Don't forget who actually has your back." That was when it clicked. I wasn't just their kid anymore. I was their prize, their weapon, their golden child in a war with no rules. At school, I watched friends complain about curfews or strict parents and felt something between envy and nausea. They got rules. I got strategy. They got grounded for sneaking out. I got interrogated for tone that sounded too much like your father's. They fought battles that ended after slammed doors. Mine never ended. They just escalated into new arenas. Birthdays, graduations, even college applications. When senior year rolled around, they both showed up at my track meet, for the first time in years. I thought maybe, just maybe, they were trying to support me instead of recruiting me. Until afterward, when Mom cornered me at the bleachers with a Tupperware of homemade cookies. "You'll always have a home with me," she cooed. Minutes later, Dad appeared by the parking lot, clapping my shoulder. "I'll always make sure you're provided for." Different words, same move, each of them treating me like a bank account that hadn't matured yet. The worst part? For a while I believed it was love. I let myself think being the center of their attention, no matter how twisted, was proof I mattered. That the constant pressure was some distorted form of care. But love doesn't feel like walking a tightrope with no net. It doesn't leave you checking your phone at night, praying neither parent drags you into another round of, "Who do you think is right?" It took me until college to finally see it clearly. I'd gone home for winter break, and both parents happened to invite me to dinner. On the same night, different restaurants, 20 minutes apart. Neither backed down. Both insisted. When I suggested they coordinate, the silence was deaf. When I started pulling back, my parents noticed immediately. At first, I thought they'd be relieved, less pressure, fewer arguments. Instead, it was like pouring gasoline on their fire. Dad began calling me every morning, not to ask how I was doing, but to deliver updates on Mom. "She's wasting her savings again," he'd say casually, like telling me the weather. "Just so you're prepared." If I cut the call short, he'd text paragraphs, attaching screenshots of her Facebook posts as evidence. Mom went subtler. She started mailing care packages, little boxes with cookies, socks, even gas cards. But tucked inside was always a note. "Don't let your father convince you I'm unstable." She weaponized kindness the way someone might lace honey with glass. At school, I tried to compartmentalize. Classes, track practice, late-night study sessions with friends. But the phone never stopped buzzing. I'd silence it for hours, only to turn it back on and find myself drowning in emergencies. One time, I missed 20 calls from Dad during an exam. When I finally answered, breathless and panicked, he just sighed and said, "Don't worry, I handled it, but you should have known." Every silence became an accusation. Every refusal to engage was proof I was siding with the other. By sophomore year of college, I stopped going home for breaks. I'd crash on couches, volunteer for extra shifts, invent excuses. The thought of those checkerboard weekends filled me with a dread so heavy it sat in my lungs. And yet, the less I showed up, the more desperate they became. That's when Mom played her trump card. One evening, she called sobbing, saying she'd been diagnosed with a serious illness. My chest went ice cold. I skipped class, drove to her house, bracing for hospital bags or paperwork. Instead, I found her sipping tea in the living room. When I asked for details, she grew vague. "It's early," she whispered. "The doctors don't want to label it yet." Later, Dad gleefully debunked her story, waving lab reports he'd somehow accessed. "She's faking to reel you back in," he said, satisfied like a detective solving a case. That was the night I realized neither of them cared about my peace. They only cared about winning, and if they had to burn me down to beat each other, they would. So I made myself a promise. I'd stop being their evidence. I'd stop being their golden child. I'd stop being their anything. When you grow up in chaos, building walls feels like freedom. By junior year of college, I had mine stacked high. No more midnight phone calls. No more surprise visits home. I told myself I could love them from a distance, as long as that distance was measured in states, not miles. But my silence only made them louder. Dad started forwarding me his financial struggles, emails about unpaid bills, voicemails hinting that if I cared about family, I'd help. Mom countered with emotional blackmail. "If I die tomorrow," she said during one of her guilt-laden calls, "you'll regret not spending more time with me." It wasn't a request for love. It was a demand for compliance. I tried reasoning. I explained that I needed boundaries, that their constant fighting was hurting me. But to people who thrive on war, boundaries are just new battle lines. They took my distance as betrayal. Then came the final straw. It was during spring break, when I decided to stay on campus instead of visiting. I thought I was being responsible, keeping the peace by avoiding the battlefield. Instead, both parents showed up at my dorm on the same day within hours of each other. First Dad, waving takeout containers and trying to play the fun parent. Then Mom, with homemade lasagna and tears in her eyes. Neither knew the other was coming. When they ran into each other outside my building, it was like watching two storms collide. Shouting, accusations, threats of legal action, all in front of my roommates, my professors, even strangers on the quad. I felt my face burn with humiliation. I wasn't a kid caught between parents anymore. I was an adult being treated like property. That night, I packed a small bag and drove off to a friend's house 3 hours away. Sitting in his guest room, I finally admitted the truth to myself. I didn't love them. Not anymore. Not in the way children are supposed to love their parents. Because love built on manipulation isn't love. It's survival. And I was done surviving for them. The next morning, I blocked both numbers. For the first time in my life, the silence was mine. And it was beautiful. Blocking my parents felt like cutting the wires on a bomb. For a week, I lived in peace I hadn't known since childhood. But narcissists don't vanish when you shut the door. They just find windows. It started with relatives. My aunt called, her voice heavy with disappointment. "Your father says you've abandoned him after all he's done for you." A cousin messaged on Facebook, "Your mom's sick and you don't even care?" Each conversation was rehearsed, as if scripted by my parents themselves. I tried explaining how I'd been manipulated, how every phone call was a battlefield, but blood runs thicker than truth for some people. Many of them chose the story they'd been fed, that I was ungrateful, selfish, cold. Then came the escalation. Dad emailed my university dean, claiming I was mentally unstable and needed intervention. Mom sent long letters to my friends, painting me as a heartless son who abandoned a dying mother. Some friends believed me, others didn't. Every circle I stood in suddenly felt poisoned by their shadows. But the worst moment came when they turned on each other publicly. My parents began posting online, cryptic statuses, vague accusations, subtweets dripping with venom. Anyone who knew me could piece it together. My private pain was now digital entertainment for extended family, neighbors, even old classmates. I should have felt devastated, but instead I felt clarity, because in their desperate smear campaign they exposed themselves. No loving parent would torch their own child's reputation for leverage. No truly caring mother or father would weaponize Facebook posts just to win a phantom custody battle over a grown man. They proved to everyone what I had known for years. They weren't victims. They were destroyers. So I stopped defending myself. I stopped explaining. I stopped answering relatives who demanded my side. For the first time, I understood that silence wasn't weakness, it was power. And in that silence, I started planning my exit for good. I didn't know it yet, but the next chapter would be their most desperate move, the one that finally snapped the last thread connecting us. When manipulators feel their grip slipping, they don't let go gracefully. They claw, they dig, they bleed on you if they have to. For my parents, the desperation came wrapped in paperwork. I hadn't spoken to either of them in months when I received a certified letter at my apartment. My stomach dropped at the sight of their names on the return address. Inside was a legal notice. My parents had both filed to list me as their power of attorney. In plain language, it meant they wanted control over my decisions, finances, and obligations if anything happened to them. It was absurd. I was 24. I had no say in their health, their bank accounts, or their futures. Yet here they were, trying to handcuff me legally to the very people I'd cut off. I called the courthouse, trembling with fury, only to learn that it wasn't even valid. They'd filed drafts, hoping the intimidation would scare me into agreeing. It wasn't about legality, it was about pressure. About sending the message. You can block us, but we'll always find a way back in. Not long after, my aunt forwarded me an email chain my father had sent to relatives. In it, he claimed I was considering reconciliation and ready to forgive, as if planting the seed would make it bloom. Meanwhile, my mother texted one of my old friends pretending to be sick again, asking if they could convince Noah to visit before it's too late. The web of lies was suffocating, but instead of pulling me back, it shoved me further away. Because every scheme, every fake illness, every desperate legal stunt only confirmed the truth. These weren't parents fighting for love. These were people fighting for control. And once I saw it that clearly, something inside me hardened. I didn't owe them explanations. I didn't owe them visits. I didn't owe them me. The boy they manipulated had grown up. The pawn had learned how to walk off the board. But their final act, the one that destroyed even the smallest chance of reconciliation, was still to come, and it would happen at a funeral. Months after my grandfather's funeral, I got a call from a lawyer. My stomach knotted the moment he said my name, but this time it wasn't about mom or dad. It was about my grandfather's will. He'd left me something. Not money, not property, but words. A letter, handwritten in his careful script, sealed in an envelope with my name. Inside he wrote, "Noah, I know how hard it's been to be caught in the middle. You were never supposed to carry your parents' war. You deserved love without conditions. I can't change what they took from you, but I hope you never forget. You are not defined by them. You are defined by the life you choose to build." I cried for hours, not because of the gift itself, but because it was the first time in my life someone had acknowledged the truth without spin. He saw me, really saw me. The rest of the will revealed another twist. My parents had expected to inherit most of his estate. Instead, he left the majority to charity and small amounts to each grandchild. Including me, my parents got nothing. The outrage was immediate. Mom called, screaming that I'd turned him against her. Dad left voicemails full of venom, accusing me of poisoning the family. But for once, I didn't feel guilt, because my grandfather's final act wasn't about money. It was about justice. He'd seen the manipulation, the cruelty, the way they weaponized me. And in his quiet, deliberate way, he had cut them off just as I had. That was the last straw. I changed my number. I moved to a new city. I built a life without them. And when people asked about my parents, I no longer stumbled for excuses. I just told the truth. They're not a part of my life anymore. The boy they used as a pawn was gone. The man I became was free. And for the first time, love didn't feel like a war I had to survive. Felt like peace.